Okay, so here we are. We've got to the end of, nearly got to the end of the course. Well done. That's great. You're here. A few people in the group I was in earlier on were saying, golly, these last 3 weeks, there's a lot in it. And that's my fault, because I wrote it. So you know who to blame. Yes, in a way what I'm trying to do in this course is give you a sense of the whole shape of, spiritual life is the wrong word, but because I don't like that word, but the whole shape of the Dharma life, the whole shape of a deepening and ever-deepening human life. You can't possibly do that in 8 weeks. But what I wanted to do in the book is give you a picture of that. Somebody else can. Yeah, I wanted to make sure you had a sense of all that. So it might be that you come back to those last chapters. There's a lot in those last chapters, and they ask for, even as it were, demand much more of a kind of studying, time to reflect on it, and so on. I don't know about you, but it's more and more difficult, isn't it, to find time to do serious reading. You know, you do your bedtime reading and you're reading on the tube, but some things just don't sit in that way very easily. I'm reading these essays by Marilyn Robinson at the moment, which I think are wonderful, but I have that sense of I'm not giving them the proper kind of attention. They need to be read in each essay, they need to be read not in my bunk bed upstairs, you know, after a class where I can't remember what the last paragraph was. You know, they need, and isn't it a shame that we're not giving things that kind of attention? One of the wonderful things about being on retreat actually is you can read properly, and things go into you much more, and you can have forgotten what reading can do. It's a wonderful thing to read well. So you might want to go back to those chapters. You might want to go back to that. Okay, so I want to just say a few kind of wrapping up remarks today. I don't know how much I've got to say. Actually, I don't, as yet, know what I'm going to say. But I'll say something, I'm sure. The main thing to say is how, to really consider how you're going to continue. If you're going to work with your mind, if I'm going to work with my mind, I need all sorts of conditions to support that. It's amazing how little attention there is on that in our lives. We get drawn into all kinds of things and we forget to work on our mind. But the state of our mind is the state of our life. So you need to be amongst like-minded people regularly, so that you're with people who you can interact with in a vivid and honest way, and they will interact with you in a vivid and honest way, with a sense of that there are values in life and that there are values in you, and not this cynical sense that things don't matter, because that will actually damage your life if you think that, and damage other people's lives. So you need to be amongst like-minded people. That's one of the reasons why we have the centre here, so that you can just keep meeting like-minded people. And one of the things I've been noticing on this course is just how good the atmosphere between us has been. It's very difficult to get people to go and have a cup of tea, for instance. And that we have to sort of... Anyway. And that's because, the connections are forming between each other, and you want to continue those connections. And that's really, really important. So see if you can keep coming regularly. And the reason we've been doing these courses on a Wednesday, because it makes it as easy as possible for you, because you just come next Wednesday. You just carry on coming on a Wednesday. That's the easiest thing to do. Yeah. And then if you've been coming for a Wednesday for a bit, you might think, I might as well join the team. And then you talk to one of us and say, why don't I join the team? And that just means you come a bit earlier and help setting it up and help wash up at the end, and there you are, you're on the team. So before you know it, you're holding the bowl rather than, the other side. And that's the idea, We're trying to create between us a vivid human community that interact positively and vitally with each other. And that affects your mind, the kind of mind you have, because your mind isn't yours, it doesn't belong to you, It's something that happens in relationship to others, isn't it? We too easily think our mind is our own. There's a lovely passage in a novel by Penelope Fitzgerald, who is one of my favourite novelists. It's about one of her early novels, and it's about a character who tries to commit suicide. And the character says to the nurse in the film, "I wanted to take my own life." And the nurse says, what made you think it was your life to take? I was really struck by that. She just says, what makes you think it was your life to take? That's not you can't take it, because it's a shared life. What makes you think it was your life to take? So when we think of changing our mind, it's as much to do with as you in relationship with others and you in a context. You change when you go into a different context. And you know that because all you need to do, especially if you're me, for instance, all you need to go is to go and see your GP. And suddenly you're like completely passive. Like that's what I go and see my GP. I'm like, little thrush kind of, looking worriedly from the branch of, and accepting their godlike pronouncements on what I should do. And they say, well, what do you think? I go, I don't know, I'm not a doctor. You know how that funny feeling that you were like a person capable of you were living your own life. You go and say, okay, next, and you go in and you sort of shrink into this sort of 7-year-old who just sort of great big eyes worrying, what you should do next. Just shows you that context can change you completely. Or you go back to see your parents and you suddenly devolve is a really classic one, isn't it? You were doing fine, suddenly you go back to your parents and suddenly you think, what happened to me? Or, you're amongst people who, are unpleasant, and before you know it, you're starting to be unpleasant. So mind isn't something we own. We have this weird Western idea that I've got my mind, so it doesn't really matter where I go, it's still my mind. But actually, you become a different person in different contexts. Yeah. So if you're in a context that is calling from the best in you, you're much more likely to bring that forward. If you're in a context that's drawing something negative from you, you're very likely to bring that forward as well. Yeah. Sometimes people talk, don't they, rather sort of, whatever about, the Nazis and so forth. But probably if we were all living back there, statistically, the most likely thing is we would be with the baddies. Yeah? We would not be the one who saves Anne Frank, because that's a very, very rare person who does that. Because you have to potentially sacrifice your own life and the life of your family. And most people won't go anywhere near that, whatever they think about themselves. It's too easy to sort of put yourself backwards in history and you're the one that does all the good things. Most likely you're the perpetrator. Which I know it sounds a terrible thought, but it is just true. It's true of all of us. It's not a personal psychological truth of you. It's just something that we need to somehow come to terms with in ourselves. And take ownership of in that stage of integration. That look what I am capable of, Yeah, so the company you keep, the context you're in, will create the kind of mind you're in, you experience. So if you work in a bank and the culture is to, work massive long hours and get completely drunk on a Friday afternoon, that's probably, even if you don't believe in that, before you know it, that's what you're doing. Human beings tend to, despite what we think, conform to the culture around us. It's quite difficult to actually genuinely outstrip the culture around us, because human beings don't. It's very, very frightening for human beings to do that. It feels very, very scary. So the instinct is to fit in with others, even if that fitting in is saying that you don't fit in. You know what I mean? I remember talking about smashing the state. We were all actually living off it. But we don't smash the state. Anyway, I just go to the dole office next day. We were very brave warriors in those days. Yeah. So see if you can come along regularly. Go on retreat. I think we've milked that to death. All right. It's like really begin to put me off. But yeah, go on retreat, because they are like the best conditions. And see if you can meditate every day. have some time every day. And if you can't meditate every day, what can you do? Someone was saying in our group, well, they've got a full job and a family, blah, blah. But there's no way that you can't do something. There's no way. You can use your walk to work as a mindfulness practice. You can decide to turn off your computer at a certain time. We all need to, and it's more and more difficult, I think, take ownership of our life. I mean, never mind these later stages. Just taking ownership of our life and just being able to turn off the computer or not keep on looking on the phone, that's a difficult enough thing as it is. Never mind, I don't know, wisdom and all these rather posh-sounding things. How about we get to bed? I mean, challenge. That sort of thing. So let's start small and grow up. Yeah. So those are the things I always want to come back to: is keep coming along regularly, get to know people who come along regularly, then go on retreat together, and then carry on coming regularly. And iteratively, gradually, as you practice mindfulness, as you become friends with each other, as you start to tell the truth more, you will definitely grow. There's no doubt about it. You do. Human beings have got incredible capacity to grow. And really that's the main thing I want to stress this evening. I've stressed rather than the negative side of our mind, that we would be the perpetrator. We would not be the hero, probably, unless we're really quite remarkable. We're not that person. It's too horrifying. It's too frightening. There's too much against us. And it's easy to think, gosh, that's a very pessimistic vision of life. But it's not a psychological thing. It's just a human thing. There's nothing personally wrong with any of us, probably. But we have this incredible potential. And that's really what Buddhism is. And this whole course is trying to help us realise, is we have this incredible potential. And what Buddhism says is that potential goes much, 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 much deeper than you think. Yeah? In fact, it becomes something like that. Yeah? That figure that represents our potential. It doesn't represent some sort of God or deity or figure of judgment. It represents something deep within us, a potential within us. We don't realise how much potential we've got. I say we don't, but we sort of do. We sort of have a sense that we're not living up to our potential. I mean, to be honest, to be perfectly frank, I've been feeling this week I'm not living up to my potential. I've been thinking, I haven't worked it out yet, but anyway, luckily I don't need to because it's the end of the course. At least I don't need to for you. But this week I've been, that feeling when you think, this isn't quite right. If you look at my life this week, it's fairly blameless. I'm doing lots of good things, but I don't. Apart from that film, oh my dear. Anyway, but I've had this feeling all week. That background feeling that I'm not really living up to my potential. Is it partly I'm getting too exterior or something? My life can easily, because I'm an extrovert and I do a lot of stuff, I can easily get drawn too out in myself and so on. But it's that feeling that you have when you think, this isn't good enough. And it's not that it's not good enough in the sense of somebody else would think this is not good enough. Because sometimes other people think, no, it's great. But you yourself think, I'm letting something down, and you look at your life and you think, well, it all looks fine, but you don't feel like you're living up to your potential. I think we all have that sense that I'm not really living up to my potential at the moment. I'm missing something. That's been my sense of myself this week. And I think that's a really serious sense, that sense of not living up to one's potential. Part of it is losing the wood for the trees, or whatever the metaphor is. Part of it is forgetting to experience things as being beautiful. Part of it is kind of forgetting what you're really about. That's why bringing death to mind is so important, because it's a fantastic clarifier if you can really bring it to mind. And we all have that experience, don't we? That I'm fine, sort of, but I'm not living up to my potential. And you see how that, again, has got these two sides that I seem to be very much Jana's face at the moment, which is that you know that there's more to you. And you know that what you are just now isn't enough. And the tendency at the moment in some ways of thinking is, oh no, but you're fine. But increasingly I find that unhelpful. I think, well, no, you're not fine now. There's much, much more to you than that. Don't just settle with that. There's much, much more. Just talking to somebody in the break about, he was talking to me about a meditation practice where suddenly, you open up the mind and there's joy and there's rapture and there's experiences quite beyond your sense of what you're capable of. Once you touch that, you start to think, golly, there is much, much more potential than I thought. This being human, I've hardly started to touch the edges of it, the hem of it. And it's all available to you because you've got this magnificent mind. No way is your mind not magnificent. Whatever you're like, on history or maths, my maths is pitiable at best. Whatever you're like in what you think subject, you have got a magnificent, magnificent mind, the most remarkable mind, most remarkable thing in the universe. Your potential runs so much deeper than you think. And mostly what we need is conditions in which our potential can be actualized. And when you start to actualize your potential, you feel like that is the meaning of life. It sounds very grandiose, but you really do. It feels like it's got a directionality to it. It's very different to this "you're fine as you are" thing, which I don't like very much. I don't think it's true. And I don't think it helps to say things to yourself that aren't true, even if you're doing that for sort of good reasons. But when you start to access this sense that you've got this potential, even when you see it in small things. Again, I was talking to another friend earlier on, he was just saying he just, slightly without thinking, was generous. In bad conditions, difficult conditions, tired, late at night, had to go on a night bus, was generous. And really shocked about how much that changed his whole mental state. It is quite remarkable sometimes if you're just generous. If you activate that generosity, incredible the change it can make, especially when you activate it from a place where you don't really want to be generous. And you immediately get a sense of this incredible potential you have, and that has within it a kind of directionality. You feel it to be going somewhere. Do you do what I mean? That you feel that all you need to do is be honest. I remember when I was fairly newly ordained, and there were order members who were much more senior than I had that had taught me. It's been like you, and I'd been sitting at the front here teaching. And one of them was doing something that I didn't think was very good. It wasn't terrible, but I just didn't think it was very good, and I thought it was having a bad effect. And I remember thinking I must talk to them about it. So I, went to the place, and I felt very junior, and felt a bit cheeky saying something. And it's easy to overdo it then and say, that's really not getting very heavy and moralistic, which I don't like at all. None of us can afford to be moralistic. But I went there and I said, look, I don't want to make a big deal of this, but I'm hearing this coming back to me. What do you think? What's going on? Because it does concern me. But I did it really well. I mean, it was a long time ago, so I can't boast about it. I did it really well. I did it better than I thought I could do it. I took it seriously. I thought, okay, I'm going to say that, but I don't want to say it in a moralistic way. I want to make sure that I'm showing that I appreciate them. But I do also want to say, I don't think that's very good, and I want to ask you not to do that. And I remember walking down the stairs afterwards and feeling, this is just lovely. I'm like a grown-up. It's like I'd suddenly become a sixth former. At last, at the age of whatever I was then. I was like a grown-up. But it wasn't just that. It was this sense of, golly, I can be, to use that, Dickens' phrase, I can be the hero of my own life. That's not for somebody else. That's not for someone who looks more like the hero of their own life. I can be that person. Just in a simple way, just go to town, a bit of a challenge. Okay, I'm going to say that difficult thing in a way that's useful and productive, not moralistic and finger-wagging. None of us want anyone wagging their fingers anymore. We've all absolutely sick to death of that. I am, anyway. I'm sure you are. But when you manage to speak well, you have this sense of, golly, there's so much more to me. I can do that. Or you meditate and you apply yourself in meditation, and suddenly the meditation opens up and you think, golly, there is a path. There is a path from where I am now into unknown reaches that, had you told me about a year ago or 2 years ago or 5 years ago, I would have just thought, oh, it's ridiculous, it's just a fantasy. But there it is. It's a lived experience. I don't need to doubt it because it's living through me. There's nothing to doubt, Some of the experiences I've had, I just think, well, that won't happen to me. I'm not that kind of guy. I'm from a small town in Warwickshire. You don't get those kind of mystical experiences. It's not for me. But I've definitely had them. And when I've had them, you feel in that moment that this matter of potential isn't something out there. It's not a fantasy after all. It goes all the way through your blood and your bone. And what Buddhism, the word that Buddhism uses for that is Shraddha. It's usually translated as faith, but it's not a very good translation. It just means trust, confidence. That you've got trust and confidence that you've got this incredible potential and that you can activate that potential. You can activate it in your friendships. You can activate it at work. You can activate it in the moment when you're generous to a homeless person. You can activate it when you go on retreat. And it's not other people's. It's not for somebody else. It's you yourself can live in a way that's so much more flourishing. And that when you start to touch those things, actually what it does, it kind of rocks your life a bit because you start to get much less satisfied with living in the surface of yourself, in the banalities of yourself, in the shallow water of yourself, which we so easily get accustomed to. So Shraddha is this capacity to feel confidence, trust in this potential we have, and that potential runs deeper than you're imagining. And the door to that potential is direct in your direct experience. It's not. You don't need to have read anything. You don't need to have read any of this book. You don't need to be very clever. You don't need to be very successful. You don't need to be very gorgeous. You don't need anything. All you've got is this incredible potential, this incredible mind, and we need faith in that, and we need to be around people who have faith in that, because it's sometimes difficult to have faith in it in yourself. I don't know whether you found this. I found this in my life that I think, oh yeah, that's great. I think of my friends, and well, you're bound to have that because you're like a spiritual person, whereas I'm just this like bloke. But sometimes, you meet someone. My own teachers, they've had incredible faith in me. Sometimes they've had faith in me, Shraddha, in my potential, when I haven't, if you see what I mean. And they've activated that for me. They've helped me see that. Oh no, that's for me. That. So we need to be around people who see the best in us and draw the best in us out of us, as it were. So in a way, that's the main thing I wanted to say this evening, is this potential we all have. And you see how to access that potential, it's got these two sides. One side, and this is a harder side, and I know it can sound uncongenial. I hope it doesn't come across uncongenial. It's not a personal thing. It's just that you know that you're not living up to your potential. You know somewhere that it's not good enough. You don't want your life to be like this. Even when you're in the midst of it, sometimes you know it's. What am I doing? This is rubbish. You kind of know that. In other words, to access your potential, there needs to be some genuine sense, not a moralistic sense, not a kind of religious sense, just some genuine sense that of dissatisfaction, in other words, with your everyday consciousness, with your life. A genuinely healthy person has some kind of, even quite deep-rooted dissatisfaction with everyday life. It can even become a kind of disgust for everyday life, that it's not good enough. Now, that's not in the psychological sense of, that awful kind of naysaying, but this genuine sense that's in your blood and your bone, that ordinary consciousness, ordinary life, social interaction, repetitive behaviour isn't worthy of us. And you might not know what is worthy of us, but you don't want to settle with that. So part of accessing our potential is being able to say, actually, I'm dissatisfied. There's a positive sense of dissatisfaction. Of course, it can be also a neurotic, kind of psychological neurotic sense. It's quite difficult sometimes to weed the one from the other. But you're trying to get a positive sense of dissatisfaction and a confidence trust that you've got this incredible potential and that you, in the right conditions, amongst friends, can access that potential. And that accessing your potential is the meaning of life. The meaning of life has nothing to do with the book, it's nothing to do with the religion, it's nothing to do with Buddhism in a sense. You can access, the more you access your potential through direct experience, you start to move towards an experience and a way of being that has to start to look something like that. Yeah? And you can see that being that instinct we all have is communicated in all kinds of distorted and half-true ways, in all those superhero things. It's all that kind of sense of we've got this potential. And you see how the superhero myth of having these superpowers, it's like just a sort of slightly, not slightly, quite really distorted sense of that. But it's not completely untrue. It's not literally true. It can't be completely untrue, otherwise millions of people wouldn't go to it. I mean, those films, I don't know anything about those films, but, they must be, I would imagine, very, very expensive to make. And the reason they can make them is because they know they're going to get millions of people to go and see them. So they must be touching on something in us. It can't just be a fantasy, because it wouldn't work. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to raise it to an art form, but I think there's something interesting about things that are very popular. The reason they must be popular must be because they touch something in us. And I think they touch within us that we have remarkable potential. Buddhism has a lot of, is wanting to say that's really, really important. That sense that you yourself have potentials that go beyond what you can imagine is really absolutely crucial, and it can save your life. Because you can have situations where you're really in a bad state, things are going badly, but you can discover this potential that somehow all of that becomes bearable. Sometimes you can be having a really hard time, and then I've had this where you're talking to a friend and you suddenly feel for them and love them. And you've been having your own hard time. I remember I had this really difficult year, where it was a very, very unhappy year, fairly recently. I won't go into why, and I was really struggling. And sometimes I'd just sort of talk to someone and be able to empathise. And suddenly all that difficulty of mine, that was all right, because it was in something much, much bigger that I discovered in, just having a cup of coffee with someone, or in a meditation or on retreat. So that's what I wanted to say for this last evening, this great matter of having a confidence and trust that we human beings have a magnificence about us, all of us do, and that our life's aim is to discover that magnificence. And it's not to do with the world. That magnificence is not really to do with, I could be a great businessman, although that's quite sort of trivial, or I could be famous, or, whatever. It's all right, it's fine, but I don't mean a magnificence in that sense. I mean something much, much more than that. And we need to have confidence and trust in that, yeah. So what I'd like to do now is suggest that you talk again in pairs or three, and just talk about where you want to go next. Yeah? How do you want to carry on discovering, uncovering, opening up to your potential? What practical steps? And what your practical step might be is actually, tell you what, I've had enough of this. Next week is cinema, But at least let's decide that's what we're going to do, yeah? no kind of moralism around it. You think, what are you going to do next? Where are you going to go? And there's absolutely no pressure to do anything. So if it's a box set, at least decide that's what it's going to be. You know what I mean? Yeah? Okay, so let's just do that for a while.